Steve Wyche, the legend at NFL Network. It's so good to have you because, first of all, when I introduced you, I said the stat that you've been covering the NFL since 2005. So you have seen everything. And really, it's perfect timing to have you on because you're either still in Orlando or you are fresh off of the owners' meetings. Um, how did this year compare in terms of previous years when it came to the announcement of all the rules and the rules changes and what to expect? Because the social media world was a fire with everything that came out. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's look, first off, it wasn't nearly as convoluted as in previous years. There were no media deals going down. There weren't a whole lot of other things. And these are the discussions like with the kickoff rule. Those have been going on for years. And so let's start there in terms of 2 years ago, there was a lot of conversation about taking the kickoff out of the game, right? Let's just have the teams take it at the 25-yard line because we're having too many concussions, too many guys getting hurt. And, when that's not happening, there's touchbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And, the NFL had all these special teams coordinators get together from all 32 teams, their assistants, to come up with an option. And they love the XFL's option, which is now the UFL, where
Mm-hmm.
you've got the kicking team, the defensive team lined up on the opposing 40, the return team lined up on the opposing 35 with one or two returners, because what that does is just short area contact, right? There's nobody running
Mm-hmm.
30 yards before a possible hit. And they're basically making rules that say you need to kick it where it's returnable. So I like what they said in terms of in the year where Devin Hester, one of the greatest returners of all time, is going to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, they're bringing the return back into the game. And they wanted to get it done now because teams are putting their rosters together, right? So they want to find special teams players that can deal with it. In terms of the swivel hip drop tackle, the swivel part is an adjective that was added days ago, because all season long we kept hearing about this hip drop tackle. And defensive players are like, look, we're just trying to get a guy down. Like we don't practice that. If I'm a smaller guy, if I'm a safety and I've got to bring down Mark Andrews, I got to do what I can. I can't use my head, X, Y, and Z. But we saw, speaking of Mark Andrews, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back when Logan Wilson, the Bengals, tackled him and broke his leg. Like these types of injuries happening over and over, about one per game, where the data they said where a guy had to miss time.
So because of that type of tackle?
Because of that type of tackle. Now, they're going to allow the traditional hip drop tackle, which is where you kind of grab a guy and you just sink, right? You just kind of drop him. But the swivel is where you grab a guy and then you just kind of swing your feet up and then try to pull him down. That's the one they're trying to do it, because they found you pulled him down, the player's legs often got caught behind him, and the defender was falling on the legs. So it resulted in a lot of high ankle sprains and things like that. And I know there was a significant uproar from the NFL Players Association and from several defensive players. But in the end, if it keeps players on the field, offensive players, because last year, what was it like when we lost all those quarterbacks? It really lost a lot of the intrigue, scoring was down, things like that. So if you can keep your fellow man on the field, the players will find a way to adjust. They always have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at the end of the day, the NFL is trying to keep the game exciting, per Andy Reid's excitement for the lack of the dead plays from seasons previous, but also the swivel hip drop tackle situation. What may incur, which was interesting, is it'll be left up for interpretation with officials and frustration with that.
Right.
So, I think at the end of the day, NFL is just trying to keep the game exciting and safe at the same time.
And I'm glad you brought up the officiating part of it, because it sounds more than anything like they're going to, if the officials miss it, they're going to fine guys, right? That's the way that they've gotten guys to adjust over the past couple of years is, it wasn't called in the game, but we're going to fine you. And so if you get hit for a $12,000 or $15,000 fine for that tackle, hey man, you may ease up. You may just completely let up and let a guy score, but it will change the behavior. And that's kind of what they've seen. If you don't get penalized, if you get penalized, it's one thing because it hurts your team as well. But if not, you just get that fine, hits you in the pocketbook, that tends to change behavior.
Yeah, and you don't wanna see these. I mean, I don't think even the opposing team wants to see quarterbacks out, because of these types of plays and
Yeah.
tackles and stuff like that. So if we're keeping guys, safe on the field, that is the goal at the end of the day. And yeah, the kickoff rule will be interesting, of course, doing right before the draft. So hopefully it'll help teams figure out how to structure their roster. Um, you know, we heard some big news out of LA. This is a Rams show after all.
Yeah.
And number 99
Oh
hanging
man.
it up. Man, first off, your reaction to that when you heard that?
Well, look, I'm. This is one where I look back in my years covering. Like, I'm glad I got to cover this dude a lot because I got to watch him practice. I got to watch him train. I got to know him a little bit. And he is, when you hear everyone say he's one of one, he is one of one in terms of he's an undersized defensive tackle who lasted 10 years at an incredibly high level. One of the strongest guys I've ever seen. He used his speed and his quickness, and I call him the kingmaker because there are so many dudes who got paid playing alongside of Aaron Donald, the Dante Fowlers of the world, the Leonard Floyds of the world, the Greg Gaineses of the world. Like, him and Ray Lewis have made so many dudes who played next to him money.
Rich.
They are like the
Yeah.
legit kingmakers in the NFL. But but just to see him and the impact he had on the game, is he the greatest defensive lineman ever? I don't know ever. Reggie White, Deacon Jones. People are going to throw some names out there, but in terms of this generation, you better believe it. I mean, there's no comparison. No one's going to make an argument for him because he could play 3 more years at that level. He's just, he just said he's full. He's done. He doesn't want to put himself through it.
Yeah, I mean, and he was such an impactful player from the jump, right? I
Yeah.
mean, his first season, he was Defensive Rookie of the Year, and then finished the game being a first team All Pro selection. I think you caught. Did you catch up with Sean McVay? Because I have no doubt in my mind that guy is not getting a lot of sleep at nighttime trying to figure out what he's going to do on defense this season. Right?
He's not getting sleep because he got a 5-month-old baby. But
Oh.
Sean was telling me that you could tell during the season that Aaron was done in terms of you could see him treasuring little things in a different way that he hadn't done before, whether it was the last time playing, up at Levi Stadium or things like you could see. So they knew, they had an inkling that this was going on, that he was kind of on the goodbye tour. So yes, he's going to be, you can't replace him. I asked Sean, I phrased it, how do you compensate? He's like, look, we got a draft. It's a big focal point, but you don't replace somebody like that. Like I said, he's a kingmaker. And so they had the feeling, they knew the past couple of years he had contemplated it. Everyone thought it was just, a leveraging the contract negotiating strategy, which it may have been. But for him to go out on his own terms is a big thing. And everyone I spoke to with the organization, people around him, they're like, he's done. Like, you see Jason Kelsey kind of wavering a little bit. I say AD's done. Like there's not an itch. There's not an itch to be scratched.
That's a wrap. It's interesting because we had Marshall on last week and he has a conspiracy theory that he thinks he wants to be highest paid. He thinks he could come back, and he thinks when camp time rolls around, which is interesting because it's true, right? When camp time rolls around and these guys that have been in the league double digits, it gets quiet. And then what Marshall said was, he said, you're like, what do I do? Obviously you can use Tom Brady as an example, right? He hung it up for 40 days and had to come back because it was too quiet for him. So you don't think that's even a possibility? Because it's happened before.
I'll never say never, but a lot of times when you hear that, Marshall, he was a running back, those guys get abused. Tom Brady was a quarterback, they don't get hit like D tackles. And look, Aaron's one of these guys who trains like nobody else. He is in the gym. He grew up, his father was a bodybuilder. He had a gym, the dungeon in the basement of their home in Pittsburgh. He may say, I need a breather. I mean, he's got 4 kids now. A couple of them are young. He might just be like, it's time to finally stand down and enjoy the life I haven't let myself enjoy because I'm constantly working and constantly training to be the best player in the NFL. So that's why, the people I've spoken to who've spoken to him just think he's done. And it's, and good for him. And good for him. He wants to be known for more than a football player. He's 33 years old, got a lot of life to live.
Yeah, and that's what Marshall said too. It's the chapter after football. It's hard to enter, but certainly he's deserved it. When you think of Donald, you mentioned defensive player of all time. Where does he rank in terms of Rams, like greatest players of all time?
Ooh, that's a great one.
I know. You know a couple guys, pretty close friends that could be in there too.
Yeah, I mean, you look when you look at some of the great Rams, you're talking about the Jack Youngbloods, of the world. You're talking about just Jackie Slater, one of the most durable offensive linemen to ever play the game. You're talking about Marshall. You're talking about Kurt, Torrey Holt, Orlando Pace. But defensively, you think of Aeneas Williams played for the Rams for a while. Again, Jack Youngblood, Merlin Olsen, Rosie Greer. You had those guys, but Aaron Donald's he's on the Mount Rushmore. He's one of those four heads on that Mount Rushmore when you talk about the all-time great Rams.
And also, do you take into consideration the era of when they play? Because it's a different game. Yeah.
You have to, but for Aaron Donald's position, kind of sort of no. Because if you put him in there, when you had Rosie Greer and Merlin Olsen and Jack Youngblood and all those guys, he would have dominated then. Now, that was much more of a run-centric era, but Aaron would have been as big as the D tackle. He would have been bigger than a lot of the D tackles. And he's undersized now. He would have fit. So I just think he's one of those guys that could cross all eras. So, yeah, for most skill positions, of course, Roman Gabriel, great guys like that, quarterback. But Aaron Donald, Mount Rushmore, one of the top four.
I love it. Peter Schrager did mention on GMFB the other day, he sees, and so did Marshall, that Donald could have a future in Hollywood, that maybe he's been hanging out with The Rock a little bit.
Yeah.
It's so funny because, you talk about Donald's personality and how he's such a monster in the gym, on the gridiron, but he's very, he's humble and a little soft-spoken, right?
Yeah, very quiet guy.
Have you seen the movie Roadhouse with Conor McGregor? Watch it. It's so good. But
I've seen the one with Patrick Swayze. I have not seen the one with Conor.
That one's great. That one's great too. But I was really surprised at Conor's ability to hold down the villain, and I think and the charisma. And I think when you think of Donald, he could you see that as a possibility?
I think he'd be great.
Yeah.
Look, he's the guy who could be like the sweet dude and all that, who all of a sudden could turn heel, to use a wrestling term. Like we would see this and that. The next thing you know, in the middle of an inter squad practice, he's swinging helmets and he's grabbing guys by the face mask. Absolutely. And he wouldn't have to say a lot. He could be one of these Arnold Schwarzenegger type of, superheroes. He's got the body. All he would have to do is smile and make his move. I think I would love to see AD in that role. That'd be great.
I love that. That would be so funny to watch. And amazing. Okay. And then, obviously Rams fans sad, a lot of QBs, however, very happy in that division. Trivia question for you. Who was the most sacked quarterback by Aaron Donald? Do you know this one?
I do know that. And that is Russell Wilson. That is Russell Wilson. I know that.
Yeah.
He's held that title for years.
Yeah, that just is a painful thought, to be sacked by Aaron Donald that many times. Poor Russ.
Well, it was funny because Greg Williams, the old defensive coordinator, came up with the scheme back when they had Chris Long. Gosh, I forget who the other defensive end was, but those two would run straight upfield, like 10 yards upfield, and box Russell in. So he would step up into the hole, and there's 99. And now other teams tried to replicate it, but that was something that they were doing all the way back in St. Louis, and AD probably was sacking Russell 3, 4, 5 times a year, in part because of that strategy.
Smart. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about that. Yeah, that was a painful era for Mr. Wilson for sure. And then, I know you need to go. You're such a busy man. And again, thank you for jumping on. For the owners' meetings, anything in specific in relationship to the team that you can sort of allude to?
Towards the Rams?
Yeah. Anything?
Well, the fact that they've got a first round draft pick for the first time since 2016. Sean was joking like, now we'll see if we use it. They better use it. Rams fans will lose their mind unless they're trading it, for some elite pass rusher, which most teams are not going to trade. So I do think they're going to use it. We've seen them load up on all these veteran defensive backs. Cam Curl, we just saw him sign Tre'Davious White. So, when you look at it, either they're going to get the best offensive tackle or an edge rusher or someone like that, or maybe a great defensive tackle to fill in for Aaron Donald, even though the draft analysts say this isn't a really strong defensive tackle draft. But yeah, and talking with Sean and a couple weeks ago talking with Les Snead, that first round draft pick is something they're like, well, this is great. We actually have it. And, we've got a little bit of cap space still to play with as well. So we'll see if they trade back into the second round, they get to take Thursday night off again in the draft. But from all indications, it seems like they're planning on working Thursday night, the first night of the draft.
Yep. Oh, Sean being so coy. Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft. And as always, your finger is on the pulse, Steve. We're so grateful we have time with you. Your perspective on the league and the future is so interesting. So, Steve Wyche, thank you very much for jumping on.
Appreciate you, Erin.